Hi everyone, and welcome to our background screencast on the Age of Realism, our next unit of study. Now to start off, we're going to look at 3 depictions of eyeballs as a way to illustrate a bridge from the Romantic period to the Age of Realism. See if you can identify the author of each quote. First one, I become a transparent eyeball. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or parcel of God. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. The eye itself revealed no emotion. Mirrored in the retina, rods, cones, and optic nerve, however, the picture of the slave being beaten by his master appeared brutal. Blood trickled down the man's face in between drops of sweat. Now, what you probably noticed is that the first 2 quotes came from the Romantic period, the first reflecting Emerson's transcendental view of life, and the second representing Edgar Allan Poe's anti-transcendental or dark view of life. The last quote, however, was depicting the way the world is from a more realistic perspective. So you see an eye bulb on the right-hand side of this slide that is very scientific, and it depicts all the parts as one might literally see them. And that's a good way to think of the Age of Realism. Now, in the rest of the screencast, feel free to pause if you need to in order to take some notes, but write down some of the key highlights, takeaways that you think will be helpful for you in understanding literature from this time period. We'll start off with the simple definition. Realism is a style of writing aiming to depict things as they are, very faithful to reality, and away from romantic illusions. So whereas Emerson and Thoreau and Whitman would reflect and depict the world as they envisioned it or as it could be, the realistic writers will be concerned with depicting the world the way that it actually is, reflecting the social and psychological reality of the time. And one of the most important issues of this time was, of course, during the 1850s and going through the second half of the 19th century, the issue of slavery. And this will be important for us to understand as we approach the next text in this unit. Now, you'll learn more about the history of slavery in the United States in your history class, but I want to highlight a few things, to help you understand the writing of Frederick Douglass, as well as the other literature that we will encounter. First off, here's a map of the United States showing the population of enslaved individuals in 1850. So you get a sense of the slave states versus the free states. Now, we spoke about this with Henry David Thoreau's desire to not support the Mexican-American War because he felt that it would extend slave states in the United States. And other individuals fought against slavery during this time as well. They were met by arguments from pro-slavery individuals who posed an argument with several different factors. They argued that slavery was justified by the natural order of things from a biological, psychological, biblical, and economic perspective. Individuals who argued in favor of the continuation of slavery felt that slave labor was essential to the economic development of the South. They argued that the Negro race was inferior and destined to occupy a subordinate position. And they argued that slavery was mandated or explained or justified in the Bible as well. They argued that a society in which everyone is free is destined for failure. Now, these arguments, as you can probably tell right from the surface, are bogus and have no weight to them at all. And if you're interested in exploring more of the specifics of how each of these arguments have been debunked, you might want to check out Dr. Ibram Kendi's awesome book, Stamped from the Beginning. And he argues in here, he basically takes issue and explains how all of these arguments are flawed. Now, during this time, there was also an abolitionist movement that argued for the abolition of slavery immediately. And in terms of the reasons for the abolitionist arguments, they were centered on 4 major issues: Christianity, economics, legal issues, and community safety. From a Christian perspective, abolitionists argued that slavery is contrary to the teachings of the Bible, that Jesus preached universal brotherhood, that all men are created equally in the image of God. They also argued that slavery was actually economically unsound, that workers in bondage could not be expected to be efficient, and that a better capitalistic society would exist in a free state. They used a legal argument, saying that slavery was contrary to the fundamental principles of American life, that freedom is an inalienable right guaranteed to all men as per the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. And lastly, they argued that the institution of slavery posed a threat to communities' safety, and that it was a menace to the peace of communities as the South was becoming an armed camp where individuals lived in constant fear of uprising. Now, there were several important historical events that led up to the Civil War and may have impacted the direction of our country during this time. We're going to do a brief overview. Again, you'll learn more in history. I want to talk briefly about David Walker's appeal that called for Black unity and the abolishment of slavery. Now, David Walker was a free Black man. His mom was free, his dad was enslaved, and he left North Carolina to establish his family in Massachusetts, where slavery was made illegal after the Revolutionary War. Now, his book, as was mentioned, was a call for Black unity and the abolishment of slavery, and it highlighted the abuses and inequitudes and the responsibility of individuals to act according to religious and political principles that guaranteed freedom for all. It is still to this day considered one of the most vigorous denunciations of slavery ever printed in the United States. Several editions were published and widely circulated in the North. They were smuggled in the South, where the book was banned, and it brought to light many of the injustices of slavery that were happening in the South. Now, a price was put on Walker's head, and he was actually found dead in 1830 in front of his Boston store, apparently poisoned. As a result of this, or echoing this, was Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831. Nat Turner was born into slavery in 1800. He felt that he was always intended for some great purpose and had visions as a child. He plotted to overthrow his master and went on a 48-hour, 2-day rebellion where he was aided by different individuals in plantations around him. He was ultimately captured and hanged, and the impact was severe reprisals against the enslaved individuals in the South. Both of these led to new, harsher, stricter and slave codes in the plantations, and started a cycle of then other individuals arguing for abolition, with then some retaliation from the South as well. In the North, abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison published magazines and journals like The Liberator, in which he argued for the immediate abolition of slavery. Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852. Although criticized by perpetuating some stereotypes, the book brought to light the horrors and abuses of slavery to many readers in the North. It was a bestseller. Abraham Lincoln, when he met Harriet Beecher Stowe, credited her with being one of the individuals who started the Civil War. And then lastly, just want to mention briefly John Brown's uprising in 1859. John Brown, a white abolitionist, attacked the Harper's Ferry with an idea of trying to lead a slave rebellion. He was brought down by the U.S. Marines, and he was executed as committing treason. However, some individuals made him out to a martyr for the cause, willing to sacrifice his life for the greater good. In fact, Henry David Thoreau wrote a piece about him. And this, he said right before he died, quote, "The crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood." And some individuals believe that this was a major precursor to the Civil War. Now, during this time, enslaved individuals were able to escape slavery and go to the North. You've heard of the Underground Railroad, a system of helping fugitive slaves escape to free states. The conductor of the Underground Railroad, Harry Tubman, was responsible for the freedom of many, many individuals. There's a great movie that came out last year you can rent on Netflix about Harriet Tubman's life. It gives a great window into her work. Also, during this time, individuals on plantations started singing slave spirituals and code songs that would actually have different messages to help individuals who were escaping slavery find the path up to north to freedom. Go Down Moses, the song we listened to at the beginning of class, is one such song, which alluded to the Jewish captives in Egypt and tried to make an analogy to the enslaved Black individuals in the South searching for freedom. During this time, the Fugitive Slave Act was part of the Missouri Compromise in 1850. This will be very important in understanding some of the reactions of individuals in the literature we read. It required that all escaped slaves upon capture be returned to their masters, and that officials and citizens of free states had to cooperate. So this had a significant impact on individuals trying to escape slavery. Now, into this world comes Frederick Douglass. His timeline date is 1885. He was born, we think, around 1817 in Talbot County, Maryland. He escaped slavery in 1838, and when he did so, he chose his last name Douglass as represented from the hero of Sir Walter Scott's romantic novel, The Lady of the Lake. Now, in his younger days, he was sent to Baltimore, where he worked on the docks. He learned to read there, and then he went back to his plantation. When he was 24 years old, he was hired as an anti-slavery lecturer in 1841. He became very famous in terms of arguing against slavery and for the abolition of slavery. In 1845, he published his first autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, and he revised this with 2 more versions. We'll read 2 excerpts from this in our study. He founded newspapers, including the North Star, which was a guiding light to freedom, and he recruited troops for the Union Army. He even served as the minister to Haiti from 1889 to 1891. And the day he died, he gave a speech to the National Council of Women. We'll be talking about his work for women's suffrage next semester. Here are some pictures of Frederick Douglass, and we're, for our class, going to look at some of his essays, which are examples of the realism style that we spoke about earlier. In fact, he wrote what we call fugitive slave narratives, during which he exposed the terrors of slavery in the South and discrimination in the North. These texts would battle the myth of slavery as the natural order, and they were banned in the South. So the 2 essays that we're going to read from Frederick Douglass are examples of those fugitive slave narratives. You're going to read first My Bondage and My Freedom, page 92 to 95. Even though that book was published subsequently, it contains a reflection on an earlier part of Douglass's life. And next, you're going to read The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, which will take on the part of his life right before he escaped to slavery. Now, as you read Douglass's essays, annotate the key passages and examples of rhetorical devices. I'd like you to do SOAPs for each when you're done. You can do those right in your books. And then next week, what we'll do is we'll look at how elements from those essays might relate to this painting. We'll try to identify the purpose of each text, and we'll analyze how Douglass helps create that effect for his readers. Enjoy!